Keanu Reeves wasn't the type to make a grand entrance. On a calm Friday evening, he stepped into Elysian Grace, a fine dining restaurant known for its exclusivity and artistry. The restaurant, nestled in the heart of Los Angeles, sparkled under soft golden lights. Each table was adorned with pristine white linens, candles flickering softly, and glasses sparkling like diamonds. Keanu's arrival was subtle. Dressed in a simple white button-down shirt, slightly wrinkled from a long day, and a pair of well-worn jeans, his hair slightly tousled, and his calm, unassuming demeanor set him apart from the usual clientele who walked in wearing designer suits and couture gowns. As he entered, the soft clinking of glasses and murmurs of conversation slowed momentarily. A few diners exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing in curiosity. "Is that him?" whispered one. But Keanu's understated presence quickly dispelled any assumptions. To them, he could be anyone, a retired traveler, a regular Joe who wandered in by mistake. At the hostess stand stood Samantha, a sharp-featured woman in her early 30s. Her uniform was impeccable, and her posture stiff with confidence. She prided herself on maintaining the exclusivity of Elysian Grace. As Keanu approached, her polished and professional smile faltered slightly when her eyes met his attire. A flicker of judgment crossed her face. "Not exactly our usual type," she thought. "Good evening," Keanu said in his deep, steady voice. "I'd like a table for one, please." Samantha's lips curled into a tight smile. "Of course, sir," she replied, her tone courteous but clipped. Her eyes, however, betrayed her doubt as she glanced at his shoes, scuffed leather loafers that had seen better days. "Let me see what we have available." Keanu nodded, his expression neutral. Samantha picked up a leather-bound seating chart and gestured for him to follow. She bypassed the prime tables in the center of the dining area, where chandeliers cast a warm glow on the elite diners, and instead led him toward a dimly lit corner near the kitchen doors. "This should be perfect for you," Samantha said with a practiced smile, placing the menu on the table with a little too much force. The nearby clatter of dishes and the faint aroma of cooking food lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the quiet luxury of the main dining area. Keanu didn't flinch. He glanced around the restaurant, taking in the ornate decor and the quiet hum of conversation. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying no hint of offense. Samantha tilted her head, her smile turning almost smug. "If you need help with the menu, let me know," she added, her tone just a bit too sweet. "Some of our dishes can be overwhelming for first-timers." Keanu looked up at her, his gaze steady but kind. "I'll be fine, thank you," he replied, opening the menu as Samantha walked away. A couple seated nearby couldn't help but whisper to each other. Howard, a silver-haired gentleman with an air of sophistication, leaned toward his wife, Ellen. "That's Samantha again," he murmured. "She always acts like the gatekeeper of this place." Ellen sighed, shaking her head. "It's a shame. He seems perfectly polite." Meanwhile, Keanu calmly browsed the menu. Samantha, standing near the hostess stand, exchanged a glance with her coworker Lucas, a younger man with a gentle demeanor. "Did you see him?" she whispered, her voice low but sharp. "I bet he doesn't even know what he walked into." Lucas frowned slightly. "I don't know. He seems fine to me," he replied cautiously. Samantha rolled her eyes. "Look at him. No reservation, dressed like that. He doesn't belong here. Trust me, he'll regret stepping into Elysian Grace by the end of the night." Meanwhile, Keanu sat quietly at his corner table, seemingly unfazed by the subtle stares and whispers around him. His calm demeanor, however, only fueled Samantha's determination. She kept glancing toward him, hoping for some sign of discomfort, an anxious glance at the menu, perhaps, or an awkward call for assistance. But none came. Keanu simply sat there, his posture relaxed, his gaze occasionally drifting across the elegant dining room. At a nearby table, Howard and Ellen continued their quiet observations. Ellen leaned closer to her husband, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wonder if he knows how this place works." It's so obvious Samantha's trying to push him out. Howard chuckled softly. He doesn't seem bothered at all. That calmness. It's rare. And then came the moment Samantha had been waiting for. She sauntered back toward Keanu's table, her polished heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She carried herself with an air of authority as she placed a small notepad and pen on the table. "Have you decided, sir?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes scanning him critically. Keanu looked up with a small, unassuming smile. "I'll have the Wagyu steak, medium rare," he said, closing the menu gently. Samantha's eyebrows shot up just barely. The Wagyu steak was one of the restaurant's most expensive dishes. Her lips curled into another tight smile. "A great choice," she said, though her voice carried a hint of sarcasm. "You do know it's $400, right?" Keanu met her gaze evenly. "Yes, I know," he replied simply. For a brief second, Samantha faltered. She didn't expect that. "Very well," she said, recovering quickly. "I'll let the kitchen know." As she walked away, Howard shook his head with a knowing smile. "This is going to be interesting," he whispered to Ellen. The tension in the room was palpable. Samantha's every move seemed to underline her doubts, while Keanu's calm demeanor stood in stark contrast, almost as if he was playing a game no one else understood. Samantha walked back to the hostess stand, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. She couldn't help but smirk as she placed Keanu's order. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to Lucas. "He ordered the Wagyu steak, $400. I'm betting he has no idea how much it'll cost when the check comes." Lucas frowned slightly but kept his voice low. "Maybe he just wants to enjoy a good meal. Why does it matter?" Samantha rolled her eyes. "Come on, look at him. No reservation, dressed like that. He doesn't belong here. Trust me, he'll regret stepping into Elysian grace by the end of the night." Meanwhile, Keanu sat quietly at his corner table, seemingly oblivious to the subtle glances and whispers around him. His calm demeanor, however, only fueled Samantha's determination. She kept glancing toward him, hoping for some sign of discomfort, an anxious glance at the menu, perhaps, or an awkward call for assistance. But none came. Keanu simply sat there, his posture relaxed, his gaze occasionally drifting across the elegant dining room. At a nearby table, Howard and Ellen continued their quiet observations. Ellen leaned closer to her husband. "You know, he seems oddly familiar," she said, her voice low. "I can't quite place him." Howard adjusted his glasses, studying Keanu carefully. "It's not just familiarity," he murmured. "It's his presence. There's something unique about him. He doesn't fit here, but at the same time, he commands the room without trying." Ellen nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think Samantha realizes she's digging her own hole?" Howard chuckled softly. "Not yet, but she will." Back at the hostess stand, Samantha continued her quiet tirade. "You'd think someone like him would at least try to blend in," she said, her voice laced with disdain. "This isn't a diner, this is a luxury experience. People come here to see and be seen." Lucas sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Maybe he's not here for any of that. Maybe he's just here to enjoy a meal like anyone else," Lucas suggested. Samantha waved him off. "You're too naive, Lucas. Mark my words, he's going to regret this." Moments later, Samantha returned to Keanu's table with a glass of water. She set it down with a little too much force, causing the ice cubes to clink loudly against the glass. "Your steak will be out shortly," she said, her smile tight and artificial. "Thank you," Keanu replied, his voice calm and steady. He met her gaze briefly before returning his attention to the dining room. As Samantha walked away, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of irritation. Why wasn't he reacting? Why wasn't he squirming under the weight of her scrutiny? The more composed he seemed, the more determined she became to prove her point. In the meantime, the atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift. A subtle tension lingered in the air, unspoken but palpable. Diners exchanged glances, their conversations tinged with curiosity. Some whispered quietly, speculating about the man sitting alone in the corner. "Do you think he's someone important?" a young woman at a nearby table asked her companion. "He's so calm, it's almost unnerving." "I don't know," her companion replied, "but the way Samantha's treating him, it's making her look worse than him." At the far end of the room, Howard and Ellen shared a knowing glance. "This is going to be one for the books," Howard said with a soft chuckle. Samantha returned to Keanu's table once more, this time carrying a basket of freshly baked bread. "Here you go," she said, setting it down with exaggerated care. "This should hold you over until your steak arrives." "Thank you," Keanu said again, his tone unchanged. But Samantha couldn't resist. "You know," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "the Wagyu steak is one of our most exclusive dishes. It's not for everyone. Are you sure it's what you want?" Keanu looked up at her, his expression unbothered. "Yes," he said simply, "I'm looking forward to trying it." Samantha's smile faltered slightly. She nodded curtly and walked away, her frustration growing. Why wasn't he flustered? Why wasn't he second-guessing himself? She had seen countless diners crumble under her subtle barbs, but this man seemed immune. Back at the hostess stand, Lucas noticed Samantha's irritation. "He's not reacting the way you expected, is he?" he asked, his tone neutral. Samantha scowled. "He's too calm. It's like he doesn't care." Lucas shrugged. "Maybe that's because he doesn't. Maybe you should just let it go." But Samantha wasn't ready to back down. "No," she said firmly. "I need to see how this plays out." As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the dining room continued to build. Keanu remained seated, his calm presence drawing more and more attention. Howard and Ellen watched intently, their curiosity piqued. Even the kitchen staff began to take notice, glancing out through the service window to catch a glimpse of the mysterious man in the corner. Finally, the moment arrived. Samantha emerged from the kitchen carrying a silver tray with the Wagyu steak. Her steps were deliberate, her posture straight as if she were performing for the entire restaurant. She approached Keanu's table with a practiced smile, setting the plate down in front of him with a flourish. "Your steak, sir," she said, her voice laced with subtle condescension. "Enjoy." "Thank you," Keanu replied, his tone as steady as ever. He picked up his knife and fork, cutting into the perfectly cooked steak with precision. The first bite was slow, deliberate, as if he was savoring every flavor. Samantha lingered for a moment, waiting for some reaction, anything that would confirm her assumptions. But Keanu remained calm, his focus entirely on his meal. As she walked away, Samantha glanced over her shoulder, her irritation mounting. Why was he so composed? Why wasn't he breaking? Meanwhile, the diners continued to watch, their curiosity growing by the second. Howard leaned toward Ellen. "He's not just calm," he said softly. "He's in control." Ellen nodded. "Sam has no idea what she's up against." The dining room buzzed with quiet speculation. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone could sense that something significant was about to happen. And though Keanu sat quietly in his corner, it was clear that he held the room in the palm of his hand. As Keanu calmly enjoyed his meal, Samantha stood near the hostess stand, her irritation growing with each passing moment. She stole glances at him between conversations with other diners, expecting at any moment that he'd falter, perhaps check his wallet nervously or even call her over to complain. But nothing happened. Instead, Keanu seemed entirely unbothered, his demeanor as relaxed as if he were dining at home. At the central table, Howard and Ellen continued their quiet commentary. "He hasn't flinched once," Howard murmured, his admiration growing. "You can tell he's someone who doesn't let things rattle him." "Meanwhile, Samantha's doing everything she can to push him," Ellen added, shaking her head. "She's only embarrassing herself." The tension in the restaurant was palpable. Diners who had initially dismissed the man in the corner were now paying close attention. Whispers passed from table to table, speculation building as if the restaurant were holding its breath. And then, the unexpected happened. From the kitchen emerged Anna, the manager of Elysian Grace. Her tall, poised figure was instantly recognizable, her polished appearance exuding authority. She scanned the dining room, her sharp eyes landing on Keanu's table. In that moment, her expression shifted, a mixture of surprise and recognition. Without hesitation, she began walking toward him. Samantha noticed Anna's movement and stiffened. She watched as her boss approached Keanu, wondering what could possibly warrant such attention. "What now?" she muttered under her breath, fidgeting with the notepad in her hands. Anna stopped beside Keanu's table. Her professional demeanor melted into a warm smile. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her tone laced with genuine respect. "It's such an honor to have you dining with us tonight." The dining room fell silent. Keanu looked up, his expression softening into an easy smile. "Anna," he replied, his voice low and calm. "It's good to see you. I hope I'm not causing any trouble." "Not at all," Anna said quickly, her tone almost reverent. "I wish we'd known you were coming. We would have prepared something special." Nearby diners exchanged wide-eyed glances. The whispers began again, hushed but urgent. "Did she just say Mr. Reeves?" one guest murmured. "As in, Keanu Reeves?" "That's him," another replied. "How did we not notice?" Samantha, standing frozen at the hostess stand, felt her stomach drop. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Keanu Reeves? The name echoed in her thoughts, her earlier confidence crumbling as realization dawned. This wasn't just any customer, this was the Keanu Reeves, beloved actor, philanthropist, and global icon. Anna, seemingly unaware of the ripple effect her words had caused, continued speaking to Keanu. "I hope everything has been to your satisfaction," she said earnestly. "If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to let me know." Keanu nodded, his demeanor as gracious as ever. "Everything's perfect, Anna." "Thank you." As Anna stepped away, the silence in the restaurant broke into a soft murmur. Howard leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile on his face. "I knew it," he said to Ellen, "that kind of composure, and it's unmistakable." Ellen nodded, her eyes sparkling with amusement, and Samantha thought she was teaching him a lesson. Samantha, now pale and visibly flustered, felt the weight of every gaze in the room. Diners were no longer whispering just about Keanu, they were whispering about her. The judgment in their eyes was clear, and she could almost hear their thoughts. How could she treat someone like that? For a moment, Samantha considered retreating to the back of the restaurant, but she knew she couldn't avoid what was coming. Her actions had been laid bare, and the very customer she had dismissed as unworthy was now the center of everyone's admiration. Keanu, however, remained unfazed. He continued his meal with the same calm precision as if nothing unusual had occurred, but his presence, now fully recognized, carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Samantha returned to the hostess stand, her expression suddenly serious. "Samantha," Anna said quietly, motioning for her to step aside. Samantha's throat tightened as she approached her boss. "Yes, Anna?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Anna fixed her with a sharp gaze. "What exactly has been going on here tonight?" she asked, her tone firm. "Why is Mr. Reeves seated in the corner near the kitchen?" Samantha stammered, her earlier confidence replaced with panic. I didn't know who he was," she said quickly. "I thought—" "You thought what?" Anna interrupted, her voice calm but unyielding. "That he didn't belong here." Samantha nodded faintly, unable to meet her boss's eyes. "I didn't mean anything by it," she murmured. "That's enough," Anna said, cutting her off. She exhaled deeply, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Samantha, you represent this restaurant. Every single guest deserves to be treated with respect, whether you know their name or not." Samantha swallowed hard, her face flushing with shame. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "It's not about realizing who someone is," Anna said firmly. It's about treating every guest like they matter, because they do. As Anna's words hung in the air, Samantha felt the full weight of her actions. She glanced toward Keanu's table, where he sat still composed, still unbothered. For the first time that evening, she saw him not as an outsider, but as a man who had quietly endured her disrespect without complaint. The lesson wasn't just Samantha's to learn. The diners, who had watched the evening unfold with growing curiosity, now exchanged solemn looks. Howard leaned toward Ellen once more. "You know," he said, his voice low, "Keanu didn't have to say a word. His presence alone taught all of us something tonight." Ellen nodded. "That respect shouldn't depend on appearances. It's a simple truth, but one we forget far too often." Across the room, Lucas stood silently by the kitchen, his expression a mixture of relief and pride. He had watched Samantha push her assumptions too far, and though he hadn't intervened, he felt that justice had been served, not through punishment, but through quiet revelation. The dining room, though quieter now, was alive with reflection. In the center of it all sat Keanu, a man whose humility had turned an ordinary evening into a moment no one at Elysian Grace would forget. The atmosphere at Elysian Grace had shifted dramatically. The initial buzz of whispers and judgment had been replaced by a heavy silence thick with reflection. As Keanu Reeves continued his meal in calm composure, the weight of what had just unfolded settled over everyone in the room. Samantha stood near the hostess stand, her face pale and her posture rigid. She glanced nervously at the diners, catching snippets of their conversations. Words like disrespect, unprofessional, and unbelievable floated through the air, each one cutting into her like a sharp blade. She clenched the edges of her notepad tightly, her mind racing. How could I have been so blind? Anna, the restaurant manager, remained near the kitchen, quietly observing the room. Her sharp eyes landed on Samantha again, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. Anna knew that while Samantha's actions needed to be addressed, the entire restaurant had something to learn from this moment. Keanu, as though sensing the tension, finally set down his utensils and gently dabbed his mouth with his napkin. He rose from his chair, the quiet strength of his presence drawing every eye in the room. He didn't need to call for attention, he already had it. With a calm but commanding voice, Keanu spoke, "Before I leave tonight, I'd like to say a few words." The murmurs stopped instantly, and an anticipatory silence fell over the dining room. Samantha froze, her heart pounding, as Keanu's gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on her before moving on. "I came here tonight for a quiet dinner," Keanu began, his voice steady and measured. "I didn't expect to draw attention, nor did I intend to cause a scene. But what's happened here tonight isn't just about me. It's about something much bigger." His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. Diners leaned forward in their seats, and even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the service doors, captivated by his calm authority. "Respect," Keanu continued, "isn't something you give to someone based on how they look, what they wear, or what you think they can afford. It's something you offer to every person, regardless of their circumstances. Not because they've earned it, but because they're human." Samantha felt her cheeks flush. His words weren't accusatory, but they struck a chord that was impossible to ignore. She lowered her head, wishing she could disappear but knowing she needed to face the lesson unfolding before her. Keanu's voice softened, but the sincerity in his tone deepened. "This restaurant is beautiful. It's clear that a lot of effort has gone into making it a place where people feel special. But true beauty isn't just in the chandeliers or the fine china. It's in how you treat the people who walk through these doors." Howard, seated at the central table, nodded thoughtfully. "He's right," he murmured to Ellen. "It's easy to get caught up in appearances and forget what really matters." Keanu continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Tonight, I experienced both kindness and judgment. And while the judgment was loud, the kindness, though quiet, was far more powerful. To those who showed kindness, thank you. And to those who judged, I hope this moment gives you something to think about." His words were not harsh but carried a weight that made every listener reflect deeply. Lucas, standing by the kitchen, felt a swell of pride. He had tried to defend Keanu earlier, albeit subtly, and now the quiet validation in his words gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Keanu's eyes finally landed on Samantha. There was no anger in his expression, only a quiet strength and an unspoken encouragement to rise above the moment. "Mistakes happen," he said, his voice steady. "What matters is what we learn from them. And I believe every person here is capable of change." Samantha's throat tightened, and she blinked back tears. For the first time that evening, she saw herself not as a victim of her own misjudgment, but as someone who had the opportunity to grow from it. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself, as Keanu turned his attention back to the room. "This isn't just a lesson for one person," Keanu said, "it's a reminder for all of us. When we judge others by appearances, we limit our ability to connect, to understand, and to grow. We miss the opportunity to see the humanity in each other." The room was silent, but the impact of his words was tangible. Diners exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others lowering their eyes in quiet self-reflection. Keanu stepped back slightly, letting his final words settle. "Thank you for letting me speak. I hope tonight becomes a moment we all remember, not because of what went wrong, but because of what we can take from it." As he returned to his seat, a slow clap broke the silence. It came from Ellen, who smiled warmly as she applauded. Howard joined in, followed by a young couple at another table, and soon the entire dining room was filled with applause. It wasn't just for Keanu, it was for the lesson, the humility, and the chance to be better. Samantha stood frozen, unsure of how to react. Her face burned with shame, but beneath it, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected: hope. She realized she wasn't being condemned, she was being given a chance to make things right. Anna, standing nearby, took a step forward, her expression softening. "Samantha," she said gently but firmly, "let's have a word after the shift." Samantha nodded, her voice barely a whisper, "Yes, of course." The room slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy had shifted. Keanu resumed his meal quietly, savoring the remaining bites of his wagyu steak as the diners around him reflected on what had just unfolded. Howard leaned toward Ellen with a satisfied smile on his face. "Well, that was unexpected," he said. Ellen chuckled softly. "Unforgettable." Lucas, still standing near the kitchen, allowed himself a small smile. For once, he felt that justice hadn't come through punishment, but through understanding. As the evening wound down, the lesson Keanu had imparted lingered in the air. Respect and kindness weren't just concepts, they were actions, choices that shaped the world in profound ways. The warm glow of Elysian grace began to dim as the evening drew to a close. The chatter among diners shifted. Instead of idle gossip, it was now filled with reflections on the night's events. Many left the restaurant quieter than they had arrived, their minds turning over Keanu's words. Some diners paused to thank Anna and even cast apologetic glances toward Keanu as they exited. The man who had been dismissed so easily earlier was now the quiet hero of the evening. Samantha stood by the hostess stand, her hands gripping the edge of the counter tightly. Her polished confidence had dissolved into nervous energy. Her mind replayed the evening's events. The applause for Keanu's speech still echoed in her ears, but what haunted her most was the look in his eyes, firm but kind, offering both a lesson and a lifeline. Samantha's thoughts were interrupted by Anna's voice, which pulled her back to reality. The manager's tone was calm but unyielding. "Let's talk in my office after we close." Samantha nodded quickly, her voice caught in her throat. "Yes, of course," she managed to say. Nearby, Lucas was wiping down the bar, glancing at Samantha with a mixture of sympathy and relief. He had watched her teeter on the edge all night, and while her behavior had been unacceptable, he could see the weight of realization pressing down on her. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, but she didn't notice. At his corner table, Keanu was finishing his dessert, a modest slice of lemon tart. Despite the attention he had drawn earlier, he continued to exude the same calm energy, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. When Anna approached to check on him, he greeted her with the same warmth. "Mr. Reeves," Anna said, standing beside his table. "Thank you again for your words tonight. They meant a lot, not just to the staff, but to everyone in this room." Keanu looked up, his expression gentle. "Anna, please just call me Keanu," he said. "And there's no need to thank me." It was a moment that needed to happen for all of us. Anna hesitated for a moment, then leaned in slightly. "Samantha feels terrible about how she treated you. She's young, but she has potential. I hope this will be a turning point for her." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how they grow from them. Give her the chance to prove herself." Anna smiled faintly. "I will. Thank you for your understanding." As the last of the diners trickled out, the restaurant staff gathered in the main dining area. Samantha stood at the edge of the group, her head lowered, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She felt exposed, as though every set of eyes in the room was judging her. Keanu rose from his chair and joined the circle of staff. His presence was quiet but commanding. He looked around the group, meeting each person's gaze briefly before speaking. "I wanted to say a few words before I leave," he began, his voice calm but steady. "Tonight wasn't about me. It was about all of us and the choices we make every day." His eyes swept across the room, pausing on Samantha for a moment before moving on. "We all have assumptions, biases, things we don't even realize we carry with us. But those assumptions can hurt people. They can close doors instead of opening them." Samantha felt her chest tighten as Keanu's words hit home. Her hands trembled slightly, and she clenched them into fists, trying to steady herself. Keanu continued, his tone softening. "But here's the thing, mistakes don't define us. How we respond to them does. Tonight, there was an opportunity to learn, and I hope we all take something valuable from this experience." He turned towards Samantha directly now, his gaze steady but kind. "Samantha," he said gently, "I know tonight was hard for you, and I want you to know I'm not angry. I believe you can grow from this." Samantha swallowed hard. Her cheeks flushed as she forced herself to meet his gaze. Her voice wavered as she spoke. "Mr. Reeves. Keanu, I'm so sorry for how I treated you tonight. I was wrong. I judged you unfairly, and I let my assumptions blind me. I promise I'll do better." Keanu nodded, his expression softening further. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "The fact that you're standing here and owning up to it shows strength. Growth isn't easy, but it's worth it." The other staff members, including Lucas, nodded quietly, their respect for both Keanu and Samantha growing in the moment. Anna stepped forward, placing a hand on Samantha's shoulder. "We've all had moments where we fall short," she said gently. "What matters is that we rise above them." Samantha nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She felt a flicker of relief, but also a renewed determination to prove herself, not just to Keanu or Anna, but to herself. Keanu looked back at the group. His tone now carried a quiet strength. "This restaurant is beautiful not because of its chandeliers or its menu, but because of the people who work here. You have the power to make every guest feel welcome, no matter who they are or where they come from. That's a gift and a responsibility." The staff stood in thoughtful silence, the weight of his words settling over them. Even the kitchen staff, who had been quietly observing from the back, nodded in agreement. Keanu stepped back slightly, signaling that he was finished. "Thank you all for hearing me out," he said. "And thank you for the meal. It was wonderful." Anna stepped forward, her voice filled with gratitude. "Keanu, thank you for everything. Your words will stay with us." Keanu smiled, a warm and genuine expression. "Take care of each other," he said simply. "That's what really matters." With that, he gave a small nod to the group and turned to leave. Samantha watched him go, the weight of the evening still pressing on her, but now tempered with hope. She knew she had been given a second chance, and she was determined not to waste it. As the door to Elysian Grace closed behind him, the staff lingered in the dining room, the quiet hum of reflection filling the space. It wasn't just Samantha who had learned something that night, it was all of them. Keanu's words left a lasting imprint, a reminder that respect and kindness weren't just ideals but actions, choices to be made every day. The warmth of Elysian grace dimmed as the last of the staff began tidying up, the echo of Keanu Reeves' words still lingering in the air. Samantha stood at the edge of the dining room, her gaze fixed on the door he had exited through just moments ago. The weight of the evening felt heavy, but for the first time, it wasn't crushing. It was grounding. She felt a spark of something unfamiliar but welcome, resolve. Anna approached her with a small smile on her lips and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did well tonight," she said softly. "Admitting fault and promising to do better is the first step. Now you just have to follow through." Samantha nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "I will. I owe it to myself and to this team." Lucas, who had been wiping down the bar, walked over with a warm, encouraging smile. "Hey, you've got this," he said, giving her a nod. "And for what it's worth, I've seen plenty of people make worse mistakes and never learn from them. You're already ahead of the curve." Samantha chuckled lightly, her cheeks tinged pink. "Thanks, Lucas. That means a lot." The team gathered briefly in a circle at Anna's prompting, their usual end-of-shift routine taking on a deeper significance tonight. Anna stood in the center, her posture relaxed but commanding. "Tonight wasn't just a regular evening for us," she began, her voice calm but resonant. "We learned a lesson about how we treat others and how we carry ourselves, even when we don't realize we're being watched." She glanced at Samantha, not with reprimand but with a sense of quiet encouragement. "We're human. We make mistakes, but what matters is that we grow from them and strive to be better every single day." The staff nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting a mixture of humility and determination. For some, Keanu's words had been a gentle reminder, for others, they had been a wake-up call. But for everyone, they were a call to action. Keanu stepped out into the cool night air. The streets of Los Angeles were quieter now as the evening wound down. The city lights shimmered softly in the distance, a comforting glow against the dark sky. He adjusted his jacket, his expression serene, as he began walking down the sidewalk. He thought about the evening's events, about Samantha's initial judgment and her eventual apology. There was no bitterness in his reflection, only quiet satisfaction that the moment had sparked something meaningful, not just for Samantha, but for the entire staff and even the diners who had witnessed it all. Keanu had spent much of his life being scrutinized, judged, and misunderstood, but he had learned long ago that the true measure of a person wasn't in how they reacted to judgment, but in how they carried themselves regardless. Tonight had been an opportunity to extend that understanding to others, and he hoped it would leave a lasting impression. As the staff finished their tasks, Samantha lingered a little longer, wiping down the table where Keanu had sat. The simple act felt symbolic, a way of closing the chapter on the night while preparing for a new beginning. She paused for a moment, staring at the empty chair, and took a deep breath. Lucas approached, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You look like you could use this," he said, offering one to her. Samantha accepted it gratefully, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks, Lucas." The two sat briefly in the now quiet dining room, the soft hum of the dishwasher the only sound. "You know," Lucas began, his tone light but thoughtful, "tonight could have gone really differently, but the way you owned up to everything, that's what matters." Samantha nodded, her fingers curling around the warm mug. I didn't realize how quick I was to judge. It's not who I want to be." Lucas smiled. "Then don't be. Start fresh tomorrow." She gave him a grateful look. "I will." Over the next few weeks, Elysian Grace became a slightly different place. The staff carried themselves with a new sense of purpose, their interactions with guests marked by genuine warmth and attentiveness. Samantha, in particular, transformed. She greeted each diner with respect, no longer making snap judgments based on appearances. Her humility and willingness to grow earned her not just the respect of her coworkers but also the admiration of the regulars. Howard and Ellen, The observant couple who had witnessed everything that night returned a week later as Samantha served them with grace and professionalism. Ellen smiled knowingly. "She's learned," she said quietly to her husband. Howard nodded, his eyes twinkling. "And isn't that what life is about?" The lesson Keanu had imparted that evening rippled far beyond the restaurant. Diners who had been present found themselves reflecting on their own biases, sharing the story with friends and family. The story of Elysian Grace became a local legend, a reminder that small moments of kindness and understanding could create profound change. Miles away, Keanu sat in a quiet cafe, sipping a cup of coffee as he reflected on the night. He thought about how simple acts, listening, speaking with calm resolve, and showing understanding, could shift perspectives and inspire growth. He knew the world wasn't perfect, but he also knew that moments like these made it just a little bit better. The corner of his lips curled into a faint smile as he opened his notebook and jotted down a thought: respect and kindness don't cost a thing, but their impact is priceless. He closed the notebook, finished his coffee, and stepped out into the world once more, ready for whatever small moments of change awaited him. The evening at Elysian Grace wasn't just another dinner service. It was a reminder of the power of humility, the importance of respect, and the possibility of growth, even in the unlikeliest of circumstances. And though Keanu had left the building, his message remained woven into the very fabric of the restaurant and its people.